Hello and welcome to the Thought League. Today we are going to focus on India's tech and digital journey, from being a follower to innovator and even being a pioneer in this particular industry. What is the role that the government can really play in this as an enabler, and not just that, even an equal participant with the bustling startup ecosystem? Can the government be the tech garage? And that's an idea generated by Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant. And to throw more light on how executable and actionable is this idea, we have with us on the show Cyril Shroff of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas. Gentlemen, so good to have you on the Thought League. Now, coming first to you, Amitabh Kant. Given the pandemic situation, which has given a thrust to the digital revolution, and India, like in every other sector, will want to be Atmanirbhar in this particular sphere as well. So after already banning the Chinese apps, how is the government really gearing up to be the tech garage, which is your idea, and how plausible is the dream of India's very own super app?
One of the key things is that this is a very, very unique crisis. Just to give you the dimension of it, in 2008, when there was a financial crisis, the global economy was hit by just about minus 1%. We've already reached a crisis of the proportion of about 6.5% down global economy. That's about 15 trillion US dollars. And, the only sectors which have done well are actually the tech sectors. And, the financial technology, that's the fintech and digitization, has been the two themes that have become even more prominent in this COVID-19 world. And India has actually been very diligently and consistently building its digital capabilities. And, if you look at India, it's one of the key things that's happened is that across several sectors, we've digitized. I mean, just to give you an example, look at the direct benefit transfer, for instance. When I was a young officer, most of our schemes, there used to be heavy leakages. But today, India undertakes a cumulative direct benefit transfer of 11.1 lakh crores, or US dollar 160 billion. And no leakages in all these schemes now. In 426 operational schemes across 56 ministries, there's not a single paisa of leakage. The direct benefit transfer and governance reforms have actually increased government's efficiency. The resultant savings from this alone have been close to about US dollar 25 billion. We've digitized across sectors. We've made India easy and simple. And therefore, my personal view is that there's a huge opportunity for India to technologically leapfrog. And the kind of challenges which India has across sectors, across water, across improving learning outcomes of schools, across health outcomes, and improving agriculture productivity, no other country in the world has those challenges. And if India is able to find solutions to the challenges it has, India will be providing a solution not for the 1.4 billion people of India, but for the 7.5 billion people of the world who will be moving from poverty to middle class in the next decade. And therefore, India is poised to be the tech garage of the world. And this is simply because it has built the basic building blocks of technology. It has built a very strong technology of Aadhaar, the JAM, what we call the JAM Trinity, that is the biometric payment. It's the only country in the world which has over a 1.4 billion biometric. It's the only country in the world which has over 1 billion bank accounts. Every second bank account opened between 2014 and 2018 was opened in India. It's the only country in the world which has over 1.3 billion mobile phones. And therefore, everybody has a mobile phone. And therefore, India is throwing up data which has more than the data of China and Korea put together. And our data today is the cheapest in the world as compared to its 1/10 the cost of United Kingdom, its 1/20th the cost of United States of America, and therefore India has this massive opportunity to be the tech garage of the world for the future. It just needs to use technology to leapfrog. And actually, as the Indian fintech market matures, opportunities will be plenty for both incumbents and new entrants. And there will be a huge opportunity for solving India's unique needs. Financial inclusion, access to credit, limited insurance, global reach. It'll provide a huge opportunity to be the solution provider of choice for the
Right.
global financial sector. So massive, massive opportunity to emerge as the tech garage of the world.
Your energy is quite infectious, Amitabh Kant, on this one. And it was a great speech. And of course, yes, Niti Aayog under your leadership is developing 7 products. Unnati, Swasth are some of them. But when you mentioned about some of the innovations coming in from the government side, UPI definitely deserves a big mention. Now, bringing in Cyril Shroff in this particular conversation, help us understand, Cyril Shroff, that of course government is now doing so much. IRCTC had a great IPO, and the private sector is doing so much as well. Is there a partnership that can be built, and do you think that that particular innovation can be fueled with the government's backing?
Oh, absolutely. Firstly, thank you, Amitabh, for being on this show. It's an honor to do this with you. So what you just mentioned, I think, is game-changing. And if properly implemented, I think it can unleash India's potential as the global center of innovation at scale. And let me first kind of debunk one theory which is sort of generally held. I think there's a general impression that innovation happens in the private sector and the government is some sort of a bumbling slowpoke that sort of just provides some basic and is problem solving. I think that is completely wrong. I think all great innovation can ultimately be traced to the government, and there's an interesting body of work that a lot of the innovation in the Silicon Valley itself can be traced to government support, which was sort of originally given. In fact, the best features of the iPhone can be traced, whether it's the touch screen or whether even the invention of the internet itself. All of that happened with the government. So I think it's wrong to think of innovation in a public-private binary. In fact, it is symbiotic, and the best results come when the public and the private sector collaborate. So the state and the private sector, if they can find the right model, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I think that is what will unleash the value. And I think, as you rightly said, I think the state provides so much kind of as a basic platform. It provides size, scale, last-minute connectivity. And what the private sector can come in is with capital, product design, and inventiveness. So I think the stars are completely aligned for something which is truly revolutionary. And with leaders like you, I think that's going to happen.
Right. So Amitabh Kant, these are the models that, both public as well as the private sector can really work with. What is on top of your mind? What is government's agenda on this to really collaborate with the bustling startup and the tech system which already exists, and they can create many innovations given your large scale and platform approach as well?
Yeah. So, if you look at the technology sector in India, it is leapfrogging rapidly, and it's being fueled by a very large market base, a very innovation-driven startup landscape. We have the second best startup ecosystem in India, and favorable government policies and regulations. My view has been that Silicon Valley may be having the best innovative culture in the world, but it does not have any challenges. So because it has no challenges, it keeps doing innovation for driverless cars, which is not what is required for the world if vast segment of populations have to be provided water or education or health. And therefore, you need innovation for changing the lives of the people of the world. And my personal view is that what India will drive is the vernacular will be the way forward. financial integration, and all this integration will be done allowing for local dialects and languages as opposed to delivering services only in English.
All right, so lots of big ideas there, but we need to also get into the nitty-gritties of some of them, and also standardization and creating a protocol in the virtual world, and that environment needs to really develop for even the private companies to innovate and look at the consumer-facing businesses and have disruptive ideas. So we'll discuss that and more on the idea of government as the tech garage right after this short break on the Thought League. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the Thought League, and we have with us Amitabh, Kant as well as Cyril Shroff talking about the big idea of government being the tech garage, not just for the Indian companies, but maybe for the world as an innovator and a pioneer in this particular space. Now, let me ask you, Cyril Shroff, Amitabh Kant threw a lot of big ideas. Government is working on several fronts to create that entire ecosystem. There have been some disruptive ideas from the government, which the developed world is also taking note of, like something like UPI. But do we need a proper regulatory framework and some models so that there is a templated approach and certainty of this whole system working well?
Absolutely. So I've given this some thought, and I think very broadly there are two buckets of models, Model 1 and Model 2. And Model 1 has two subsets. Let me elaborate on this. And Model 1 is kind of the non-incubator model. In Model 1A, basically the state owns what's called the pipe. It was developed by the state, funded by the state, and owned by the state. And the private sector and the innovators and private capital owns the flow. So development, for example, the India Stacks and UPI, and which was developed and what Amitabh just mentioned, is an example of that. So the development happens by public institutions and it's owned for public purposes, for private purposes. What you need to be careful about there is the terms of use, updation and maintenance, the rules of competition, and the right common carrier principle. It's like a road. So everybody can drive on that road. The road is owned by the state, and you have to have the right principles for common carrier. Let me come to Model 1B, where even the pipe is jointly developed by the state and the private sector. It's jointly developed and financed. For example, some public infrastructure already, like the National Stock Exchange, it's public infrastructure for the securities market, and it is jointly owned by the public and the private sector. Or what's likely to happen in gift cities. And the pipe itself is capable of monetization, and you can bring in private capital. And the flow in the pipe, of course, is private sector with private capital, mostly global capital. So this is the two subsets of the first model, where the state comes in with or without the help of private capital and builds the pipe. And the second model is what I call the incubator model, which is closer to the idea of the garage. It has a sort of a Silicon Valley analogy to it. You can think of Steve Jobs, Wozniak, and Amitabh Kant in the same kind of zone, the same garage kind of inventing this. And Israel has perfected this model. In Israel and Singapore is doing it as well. What is the difference here? The difference here is that the economics are slightly different. The state can own a part of the equity, or the state can have royalty as well. And you can actually develop a lot of innovation or deep technology using this model. You have access to global innovation and you have access to global capital. And I think it's important because if you want to attract the best kind of innovators from across the world, you have to create this incubator type environment as well. So the best of the news, I think, is that all these models can coexist and not mutually exclusive. And what will need to be done for taking forward this amazing dream that Amitabh just pointed out is I think you have to do all of the three.
Right. So, Amitabh Kant, I wanted to understand, has the government really looked at the execution and thought through the model in which it will like to approach in the public-private partnership?
In India is a huge amount of innovation across education, across health, across agricultural productivity, and you will see a completely, massive amount of data flow. And actually, the challenge really will be that this will enable Indians, because you're using smartphones and you're throwing up data. Every Indian will become, per capita income might be just 2,000 per capita, but there's a huge potential of Indians earning from their own data, which they will generate, and they will have this huge possibility of generating and monetizing their own data. So India may be economically poor, but we are extremely digital rich, and this will actually lead to a massive amount of wealth creation in the days to come. We've shown this through Aadhaar, we've shown this through UPI, and we'll show this through agriculture stack, education stack, health stack. And I think increasingly you will see micro, small, and medium scale enterprises utilizing these stacks. You will do credit lending based on this, and there'll be a huge amount of digital footprint. So the next billion users will all, the focus of the next billion users has shifted so firmly and irreversibly to India. And I think this is really the key to India's growth.
Right, key to India's growth, and you made a very, very important point that we are data rich, but data also comes with its own sensitivities. Cyril, Shroff, jump in on this one. Data privacy laws are still evolving, and what are the other preconditions for this particular ecosystem to be much more robust?
Firstly, I agree with everything that Amitabh has said, and this is actually the real dream that India has to offer. But I think for this to succeed, in my opinion, there are 5 sort of conceptual preconditions to succeed. The first one, which you just asked for, is about how are we going to deal with data. You need a system which creates trust for data integrity, transparency for its origin, storage, safeguarding, accuracy, and completeness. We need a framework for privacy. And we need to think of how do we conceptualize something called data trusts, where you can anonymize data and use the benefit of this massive data exhaust that is being created by millions of Indians, and find the right model to monetize it. So that's the first. The second, I think, is we need a world-class IP regime. In 2017, we were 45th out of 47 in terms of our ranking, in terms of intellectual property regulation. Now, we signed some treaties after that, so I think we've gone up a bit. But, this is an area which requires massive improvement. You can't have world-class innovation with a lousy intellectual property regime, and this also sort of feeds into the general enforcement framework. The third thing which I think we need is a stable general framework for investment. No retrospective taxation, no googlies like angel tax, and a very solid framework for FDI, coupled with a robust competition law regime. If you don't create a level playing field, you're not going to get the best technology and the best kind of global investment. Right. The fourth point, I think, is just a regulatory design idea, where I think you need to regulate by design, not by diktat. Why are some of the other innovation centers of the world sort of succeeding? Because they regulate by design. Some of these things that we just mentioned have to be built into the design of the technology itself. You can't have 500 rules for regulating all of this. And part of the design also needs to include a strong ethical framework. And lastly, I think we need a strong financing framework. Maybe it's time to think of an NIIF type entity for technology. They create a kind of a public-private partnership, attract global capital on scale, primarily dedicated to this sort of sector, the technology and the technology dream. So if you do these 5 things, I believe, you will create the right framework, and each one of them is extremely important.
Right. So these are the important aspects that even the investors that Amitabh, Kant, you mentioned about, to really be attracted to bring in more FDI in our startup as well as digital ecosystem will look out for. But I have one specific question. Do we have in place the standardization of even tracking the outcome of anything we come up with? And going back, democratization of information is extremely important. You mentioned several ideas in different sectors. I would say like something like a location mapping, logistics interconnection, detailed cropping pattern. If these things are standardized and democratization of information happens, then the arbitrage situation doesn't really game the entire system. Is there enough thought on that particular aspect?
So, I think first of all, Mr. Shroff has made some very relevant and very valid points, and I entirely agree with him because the key to India's growth is to have predictability and consistency of policy as long as there's innovation taking place. Secondly, I think whatever innovation that is being done in India through our tech garage should all be open source. And it should be all modular, it should be capable of replication, and it should all actually, to my mind, it should be through the best of India. That is the private sector working to innovate with government providing the size and scale to it. For instance, we've developed about 5,000, tinkering labs in schools through the Atal Innovation Mission recently. We've supported over 120 incubation centers. And all of these will throw up a lot of young children, who are getting used to working with high tech and artificial intelligence, robots. And actually, our challenges are so enormous. We have shortage of qualified healthcare professionals and infrastructure. But my view is that you don't need so many professionals if you use technology. You need a real-time farm advisory to increase agriculture productivity. You can't do this with extension worker. You need data flows to them. And therefore, my personal view is that we need to focus on some key levers to build up our artificial intelligence competition, real AI competence, because AI is really going to be a key driver. It's once in a lifetime opportunity.
All right. So a lot of ideas there coming in from the government. And as Cyril Shroff said, that even the government can really create innovations. Why leave it only to the private sector? So a lot happening there. Thank you so much, Amitabh, Kant, as well as Cyril Shroff, for throwing in so many big ideas as the digital revolution really picks up pace, not just in India, but across the world. And India is also set to take advantage and the big opportunity which is lying ahead for us. So can the government be the tech garage of the world? I would say it's work in progress. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Thought League.
Focus, ideate, innovate, enable. A monk who trades, an MCX IPF initiative.
Why do you want to buy chips now? The train is about to leave.
I am an expert at this. We'll jump in.
Let's jump full and with a bomb!
You will hurt yourself. Just get on the next train.
I'll make it.
Does he think he's simple?
Help!
Before you take a risk, know its worth. Do not indulge in unauthorized trading activities, which are both risky and illegal.
Presenting the all-new Harrier with the legendary pedigree of Land Rover. 6-speed diesel automatic, panoramic sunroof, ESP terrain response modes. Harrier.
Find out how India is leading the digital revolution with speed and scale.
On the Thought League this week, we discuss whether the government can be the tech garage, fuel innovation in the tech startup space, and also generate money-spinning businesses.
It will provide a huge opportunity to be the solution provider of choice. So massive opportunity to emerge as the tech garage of the world.
You have access to global innovation and you have access to global capital. And I think it's important because if you want to attract the best kind of innovators from across the world,
Stay ahead of the curve with powerful ideas and strategies from the best leaders. Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents